Okaeri, welcome back to my channel, May Between the Pages. My name is Taylor, and today we're going to be talking about diversity, or more specifically, I'm going to be making a case for diversity. Now, some of you may already be rolling your eyes at the title of this video or the mention of diversity. It's become a very hot button topic that people use to encompass so many aspects of media and stories that it's almost difficult to pinpoint what exactly it's referencing. Now, what inspired me to finally make this video is the recent discussions I've seen about all of the fantasy adaptations we've had, The Rings of Power and House of the Dragon being some of those. But I've just seen a lot of discussions of diversity around these particular stories and these particular mediums. But while they are the things that made me decide to make this video, I'm not going to be talking specifically about diversity in those instances. What I'm going to be doing is trying to separate diversity from this online buzzword that it's become, and go back to what it's actually about and what it's actually doing. As I mentioned earlier, if you're among the group who instinctively rolled your eyes or got annoyed when you saw the title of this video or when you see this buzzword used in discourse online, I highly recommend that you just stick around for a little while, maybe hear what I've got to say and see what you think. And if you're someone who really strives to have diversity in the media that you consume, then again, stick around. Maybe we agree on some things. As a booktuber, I may, without thinking, refer to reading specifically when I'm talking about this discussion, but just know that even if I do talk about reading, know that what I'm trying to say can be applied to all types of media and all types of stories. Video games, movies, TV shows, you name it. Diversity, or reading diversely, means that you're reading or engaging with stories from a bunch of different perspectives, and it's implied that those perspectives are different from your own. Most people, I believe, agree with this idea in theory, but it's in practice that I think it can be difficult to engage fully with this idea, because humans are afraid of what we don't understand. It's a natural human trait. We like to stay in groups. It's just what we do. So I think taking this theory into the practice realm is where some people might struggle with how to do it or what it actually means to do that. So what I'd like to do is take this idea of reading, watching, consuming stories through different lenses. I would like to reframe that as a type of travel. After all, there is that really famous quote from George R. R. Martin that people like to say all the time, and I'm going to read it so I don't mispronounce what he said or misquote him, but it is, "A reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies. The man who never reads lives only one." So clearly reading specifically, but other forms of engaging with stories are seen as a form of travel, a type of transportation, a way to leave your world and enter a new one, which is exactly what physically traveling is as well. And I would argue that most people, in theory and in practice, would accept that physical travel is good for your person. And not only for your person, but for your soul as well. That it allows you to have a broader worldview and see how many different types of lives exist on this planet. Most people would accept and argue that this is a really good force to have in your life. And honestly, most people are encouraged to travel if and when they can nowadays. So the question that I'm posing here is, why is visiting or experiencing someone else's point of view through the page or through the screen treated differently? For me, when I'm introduced to a perspective outside of my own, whether it's in physical travel or through the page, I view it as extra information that is now added to my worldview. And my worldview now has a more complete picture. Not that it's something that has to overtake my worldview or even something that has to be accepted into it, but it's an extra piece of information that I didn't have before. To help illustrate this, I'm going to give some examples from my actual real life. So if you don't know, I live in Japan and my husband is Japanese, and I think it's pretty safe to say that traveling and intercultural communication is a pretty big part of my life. I've learned so much about myself and the world around me through engaging with different cultural norms pretty much every day of my life. An anecdote others may have heard before is that in Japan, the numbers 4 and 9 are considered extremely unlucky. When you're counting, you can pronounce 4 in two different ways. One is yon, and the other is shi. Shi is considered very unlucky because it sounds like the word death. Similarly, when you're counting, 9 is pronounced kyu, which sounds very suspiciously like kurushi or suffering. Now, what Japanese people don't know when they always share this tidbit of information with me is that one of my lucky numbers has been and always will be 4. Imagine my shock when I learned that my favorite number, or my lucky number, meant death in the new country that I was living in. But what I did with this information is added it to my worldview. But it doesn't mean that 4 can no longer be my lucky number. It's not that I have to change something that's a part of me. It's that I now have information that allows me to understand why buildings often skip the 4th floor or the 9th floor. You might not see that on an elevator. Or parking spaces may skip the number 4 or the number 9. It's simply information that allows me to understand the world around me in a clearer way. I don't have to go around and change my personal conviction that 4 is a lucky number. Alternatively, there are some perspectives and things that I've learned throughout my life that I have actively taken on into my worldview and integrated with the way that I interact with the world around me. One maybe silly example of this is when I was living in Italy, my Italian cooking teacher told me never to measure the salt going into the pasta water. In fact, my hand was smacked repeatedly with a spoon when I tried to measure those things. I was told I had to feel the amount of salt that should be included in the pasta. And you know what? It honestly always tastes better that way. So I decided to take that piece of information, add it to my life, and now you'll never catch me measuring the salt. You just won't. Or another Japanese example might be when my in-laws told me that I shouldn't be killing the spiders that I see in my house because it's considered unlucky to kill a spider in Japan. There's a lot of things that are unlucky here. Now, me, from my American point of view, is, their place is outside. If they trespass in here, they're in my space now, and they have to deal with the consequences. But due to the pacifism of my husband and the fact that he tries to save the life of pretty much any creature that ends up in the house, I have come around to allowing a little baby jumping spider, not baby, but small jumping spider, to, cohabitate with me near the plants on the windowsill. I have named him Gerald, and I think he's adorable, actually, at this point. And he and I, we just coexist together, He doesn't get too close to me, I don't get too close to him. And I've noticed that, ironically, a lot of, the little bugs that bothered my plants have disappeared. So that's another piece of information that I have decided to take into my life, and so far it's working out for me. Now, if Gerald appears on my bedroom pillow or something, he and I may have some things to work out, but for now, I think we're living pretty much in harmony. My point with all of these little anecdotes is to try to show that because I was willing to listen and engage with the way that other people saw the world, my view, my life has been enriched. And stories can do that too. And you don't actually have to physically travel to be able to get those perspectives. And I think that's a beautiful thing. Diversity is also a relative concept based on your personal intersection of identities. Diversity could mean reading from the diaspora of the country that you live in order to understand how they might view your home country. For example, Japanese Americans writing books about Japan would be a very interesting perspective for Japanese people to hear about. Or vice versa, if you're part of the diaspora, maybe you want to find out more about how the people who live in that country every day feel about it. It can also, of course, be what most people, I think, admittedly think of in this case when we talk about diversity, in reading a book from a person whose skin color is different from yours. It can also be seeking out stories where the protagonists are older than you are in order to see how that point of view might affect the way you view the world. What wisdom do they have to share with you? It could also be something as simple as reading outside of your genre. I learn so much when I reach outside of fantasy. Whenever I pick up classics or sci-fi or even contemporary, which is a rare thing for me, I do find that I get something different out of all of those different genres. Diversity is not simply saying, I read 3 books from Black authors, 2 books from LGBTQIA+ authors, and 3 books from Latin American authors this month. My diversity box is checked. Of course, this is a way to track what you've read, and it's useful for tracking where you can expand your reading and where you're not reading enough. It's definitely very useful. But I think that diversity has sadly become this. It has become a way to show others online, look at all of this diverse reading I'm doing. And it doesn't focus on the reason why those stories could be beneficial to you. It breaks my heart when I see people talk about stories from people of color or just from all over the world, honestly, with this box-ticking mentality. And I think that's why a lot of this eye-rolling and negativity has been bred and grown around this word itself. Read diversely because it enriches your life, because the stories of others in the world have something to teach you. And it's not a bad thing to be a student of the world. You don't know everything. And honestly, the only people who think that they do are the stupid ones. So just embrace that, I say, and pick up a book that maybe shows you something you've never thought about before. There are a few books that came to mind right off the bat, and I'd just like to share a couple of them with you. The first one being A Drowned Kingdom by P.L. Stewart. This book showed me what being an oppressor looks like or seems like through the lens of those that are oppressed. So to explain that a little bit better, P.L. Stewart is himself a Black man, but the person in this book whose POV we follow is a bigoted prince who, all of the isms you can imagine, they're in here. And they're from the perspective of, arguably, our protagonist and the point of view we're viewing the world from. And P.L. does so much with this character to show the nuances and the details of oppression and what it looks like. And it's beautifully written. The point of view is wonderfully complex. Can't wait to get to book 2. But this was a wonderful read. The next one that came to mind should be a surprise to no one who's been around my channel, but that's How Do You Live by Genzaburo Yoshino, one of my favorite books of all time. This book taught me to see the beauty in the small things and try to learn from the small things, because my very Americanized, upbringing point of view is that the end goal is what's important. The hustle is important. The end result to succeed is what's important. But the Japanese way of life is much more finding the details in the small things and finding joy there. And this book really showed me the beauty of doing that. And the last one I'll show today is Gunmetal Gods by Zelma Akhtar. This book is just phenomenal, actually. I have a full review for it. I have a full review for this one as well. And there is going to be one for Drowned Kingdom at some point in the future. Just a little plug for my other content. But despite this just being a fantastic book overall, it taught me a lot about Middle Eastern history and warfare tactics, through this fantasy world. And when we did an interview with the author himself, he actually went into detail about how he had to kind of research all of that and how interested he is in that. And I learned a lot about a section of the world that I did not know much about the history of that, because I was not good in world history in high school. That was not a class that I put my all into. Like I said, those are just a few examples that came to my mind, but I can think of countless others, and I'm sure that you can too. Consistently consuming stories that only engage with the lens of the world that you're comfortable with is tempting. And there is a time and a place for those comfort reads, don't get me wrong, but it's constricting at the same time. The world is full of so many different types of lives, and stories give you the power, the ability to experience those things without ever having to physically move. Why wouldn't you want to do that? Basically, a quick summary of what I'm trying to say here is don't read diversely because someone on the internet told you you're an asshole if you don't. Read diversely because of the benefits that it offers you in your life. To close out with one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite poets of all time, E. E. Cummings, "For life is not a paragraph, and death, I think, is no parentheses."